One of the famous directors of Hollywood is a Canadian. And when a film that he produced and directed was given international fame, he was asked by the Queen of England to come to London and receive a special recognition. He was told in the invitation that he would have the opportunity to wear any medals that he had, medals of honor. And so he talked that over with his friends. He didn't have any medals. Came from Canada, but he didn't know just what he was going to wear. And so when he got to London, he went to an antique shop and was delighted to find some old war medals. And he looked them all over, and he saw one with a maple leaf on it and thought, aha, I can take that medal and wear it, and when I go by the Queen's going to say to me, you must be a famous hero as well as an outstanding director and producer of films. So he bought it and pinned it on, and when he came to the Queen shook his hand and looked at the medal and said, I see that you've been decorated. And he cleared his throat and said, yes, I have. And she said, oh, and I see the maple leaf. You must be from one of the Canadian regiments. And he said, yes, yes, I am. Thank you very much. And she said, I see that you've been decorated for bravery. And he said, well, yes, I was. And then the Queen said, and I see that you died in battle. Sometimes the outer manifestation of our dispositions betrays what's really inside. I want to give you a magnificent promise, some really good news. You don't have to inflict the world with a rotten disposition. The wonderful gift of God is that He changes us from the inside so that our disposition is transformed on the outside. We've established the basic principle that the disposition is an outer expression of the inner spirit. Abraham Lincoln said, after 40, everyone is responsible for his face. He said that long before modern facial surgery was available. And I wonder what a cosmetic surgeon might have done with Abraham Lincoln. Probably ruined his face. There was something about the character that was pressed into the lines. But I'd like to say, at whatever age, every one of us is responsible for his disposition. So often we say, well, that's just how I feel today. It's a down day, feel grim, gretzy. That's the way the world's going to have to take me. And our disposition spreads like a virus around us. And people's lives are put down, put off, confused, frustrated by what we allow to be the imposition of our disposition on them. Irma Bombrach said, you'd never go to a doctor who has dying plants in his office. And you'd never take seriously the witness of a Christian who is constantly in a grim disposition. And yet, does it happen to you? It does to me. There are some days I get to the end of the day and I evaluate the day and I realize that I've allowed false thinking, confused understanding to affect my mood and to overcome my disposition, and the impact of my relationships with others is less than a radiant, grace-filled Christian. Has that ever happened to you? But more important than that, do you know some others whose whole life is a perpetuation of a grim disposition. When the Apostle Paul closed his letter to the Galatians, he summarized everything that he had said about grace in a loving, caring promise. He said, "May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit." All throughout this letter to the Galatians, he had vividly described what grace is all about. God's prevenient beforehand, giving and forgiving, unlimited, unqualified love. He had focused the cross and had shown the Galatians how the experience of the cross in his own life had brought him to the end of himself and to the beginning of a new life. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives within me. He talked about how the grace had impacted his whole thought pattern, the way he felt about himself and other people, and the way he approached one of the great needs of his time, people who were not free as a result of the rules and regulations of religion. And he said, with vitality and power, for it is neither circumcision nor uncircumcision. Circumcision was the sign of the legality of acceptability in the Jewish religion. It's not that. It's not rules and regulations, not form or structure. In our day, I'd say it's not the theological formulations, not the denomination, not all of the oughts, but it's a new creation. And that new creation had happened to the Apostle Paul because of grace. It is grace in our spirit that transforms our outer disposition. Once we recognize that we are loved and accepted and forgiven, affirmed, cared for, cherished, it transforms our disposition. But it has to be rediscovered every day. It has to be a gift that we accept specifically for the needs and the concerns that we're going through right at that particular moment. And accepting and experiencing the grace of God in and through Jesus Christ can transform our disposition in any day, right now. There are 5 steps that I've discovered. Anytime I find that my disposition is down or negative or cranky or hostile or angry, it helps me to do several basic things. First of all, trace it. I trace the mood back to its source. And I usually find some things that are the same each time. Circumstances that I can't change or that disturb me. My own condemnatory expression toward those circumstances. And then conditional love, either to myself or to other people as a result. By tracing the source of what it is that makes us feel down, what causes our disposition to be distorted, enables us to get to the core. Once we trace it, then we can face it. That's the second step. Now, facing it means that we need to get to the inner core of the problem and see it for what it is in relation to the grace of our Lord. Usually at that moment, we are condemning ourselves for something that we've done or been, or condemning other people for what they didn't do, or in a way, condemning God for not running the universe better. Remember that famous line in Clarence Day's Life with Father? What a line. Father prayed as if he were a disgruntled guest in a poorly run hotel, as if he were blaming the management for not doing a better job. I hear lots of people pray that way, with a cranky tone, a negativism projected onto God because things aren't going their way. And that inner condemnation, either of ourselves, other people, or a questioning of God, eventually puts us into a tailspin that affects our disposition, and that disposition is projected to the world around us. So we trace it back. We face it. The third step is to allow the Lord to grace it. Let me take a noun and make it into a verb, because grace is energy. Jesus Christ is the grace of God. He enters into our spirit, for the Spirit is the port of entree, for the Spirit to come in us and then affect our intellect, our thinking process, our emotions, guides our wills, gives us courage and strength to act on the guidance that's given, and transforms us from within. The greasing of the particular thing that's causing the down disposition of any one day means that the Lord takes what is troubling us, lifts it up, forces us to examine it. If it needs forgiveness, we claim the forgiveness of the cross in that moment. If we need strength, He assures us that He will be with us and will never let us go. He will never forsake us. If in that moment we need to apply to another person what we've received, He gives our imagination a picture of what it's going to be like to go to that person and be the same quality of love that He has been to us. The transformation of the disposition by the gracing it power of Jesus Christ finally sets us free. What if you were to be to the people in your life what Christ has been to you? What would you say? How would you act? What would you do differently? I find that when I answer that question, it makes all of the difference. So very often, I get into a bad disposition because I can't control people or change situations or get people to march to my tune in my way, at my timing. Ever happened to you? And then we spiral down. But once we realize that that negative mood makes us a poor witness of Christ, we say, Lord, change me. Dwight L. Moody said, no Christian has the right to look as if he had had his morning oatmeal out of a gas pipe. And yet it's true, isn't it? If the people in your life were to describe what Christianity is about by what they observe in your disposition, what would they say? What a transformation can take place once we trace it, face it, allow Him to grace it, and then allow Him to erase whatever it is that rankles inside of us and keeps us from freedom and joy. Over and over again at the foot of the cross, as we think through what Christ has done for us and receive His actual Spirit of grace, there is a new creation that begins to happen inside of us, and we make a fresh beginning. We have the vision of what we are to do, and we have the power to do it. A man came to see me and said, you know, I really want to become a Christian now. There has been such a transformation in my wife's disposition that if that could happen to her, I really believe that there is a God, and he could possibly do something to change me. And he told me about the fact that his wife had been a part of one of our prayer groups, and she had been studying about grace and finally recognized the fact that her disposition was so angry and hostile and down that her family was about to drum her out of the car. Her husband said, unless her disposition changes, I'm going to leave. And the kids said, Mom, don't tell us about Jesus and have that kind of a disposition. Well, that drove her to the place of asking the Lord to change her from within. And she received Christ's unqualified, unchanging, unlimited love for her. It brought tears, and then healing, and then a new beginning. And it so amazed her family that every other member of the family has become a Christian as a result of the transformation of her disposition. So, how is your disposition? Take time. Take time to go back. Find out what's in there. Allow the Lord to help you face it. And then displace it with His own love and His care. It's a wonderful story of when Verdi was just beginning to compose operas. They weren't very good. But Florence always responded to his music with accolades and clapping and applause of joy, even though some of his operas weren't that good in the beginning. But one day he realized that he wasn't living up to his potential. And he found it out as the whole audience in the auditorium was standing, clapping and cheering this really second-rate opera that he had written. He looked up in the balcony and he saw Rossini seated with his hands in his lap. Rossini knew that Verdi could do better. And at the end of any day, you and I look up, and some days the master is not clapping. And it's in those days that we need to ask him to come and transform our dispositions so that we not spread on the world our own negativism and judgment. Christ can change us. He can make us new creatures within and give us love and forgiveness and peace and power to communicate to those around us. So, how is your disposition?